Thank you very much indeed. Hello and welcome once again to Regrets, where today we have as our special guest a lady who in more ways than one lived with a legend. For she was married to a man whose genius helped create a musical and social revolution. A man for whom the whole world mourned when he died at the hands of an assassin. He was, of course, John Lennon. She is his first wife, Cynthia Lennon. Terrific stuff. It was quite incredible, wasn't it, the excitement that those four lads created?
Extremely exciting. I mean, it was a wonderful time. But the thing is that to be at the centre of it was the most fascinating part of it, I think.
I can well imagine, and we'll talk to you in some detail about that presently. But first of all, let me ask you this. I know that you and John had some fabulous times together. I know that for a long period you were both very much in love. But in view of the traumas and the dramas and in the end the tragedy that resulted, have you ever, in your most private moments, regretted meeting John Lennon?
I've never ever regretted meeting John because I didn't think about meeting John at the time. I was an art student, he was an art student, and I fell madly in love with this particular person in life. And as far as regrets are concerned now, I have no regrets now, because that particular meeting with John took me through so many fantastic years. I have no regrets about meeting John.
It's a question I asked you, Cynthia, because it struck me that there you were, Cynthia Powell, a lady from, by his standards, the posh end of town, across the water, as it were, with a very bright future. You're a very talented artist, as you said. It was possible, wasn't it, that if you hadn't met up with John, you would have had certainly a more stable and possibly overall a happier time?
Possibly, but knowing myself as well, because I was a character, although I was, came from the other side of the River Mersey. That was one thing, and I was supposed to be posh and I wasn't supposed to be down to earth like the Liverpudlians. I still had my own dreams in life, my own dreams of excitement. Although I was a quiet and reserved girl at the time, there was stimulating things in life that were beckoning me on.
Well, let me just talk with you a little while about those early days, and we have the benefit of being able to talk about them with the benefit of some super illustrations you've done since about that period. When you took on this rather rebellious young man, John Lennon, what did you actually think you were taking on in fact? I mean, what did you see as the potential problems of that relationship, if any?
Well, love is blind, and I was madly in love, so I really didn't see beyond the fact that I wanted to see him every day. I wanted to be with him. I wanted to be around his circle. I wanted to be in the vicinity of John at the time, and he made me laugh, and that's very important in life.
You too, of course, were the only married members, as it were, of the Beatles group. How did the others, how did Paul and George and Ringo treat you at that time? Were they perhaps slightly resentful of the fact that you were on the scene too? Were you seen as something of a hindrance?
Not really, no, because they were younger than I was. I mean, I was the oldest of the lot at the time, so they were a little bit reverent in a funny way. I can't put it any other way, because I was John's girlfriend. Then okay, we'd better, you know, be careful. We won't say anything wrong and we'll behave ourselves. So we eventually had a great relationship as students and as school children.
Then suddenly it all took off. Beatlemania happens. Now, we know what the pressures were for them, for the lads. What fascinates me was what were the pressures for you as the married woman involved? Suddenly being whisked from Merseyside to eventually, anyway, mansions like the one you had in Weybridge, suddenly having Rolls Royces, suddenly having staff. How did you, as an ordinary lass from Liverpool, handle all that?
Not very well, actually. Well, I handled it as well as I could, because it was much more fun in a bedsit in Garmoy Road in Liverpool, because there you knew where you stood. You knew that you'd get your students' grant, and you knew what life was doing to you. You knew what was going to happen virtually the next day. But when all of a sudden it took off and you ended up in a mansion, which at the time cost £19,000. I mean, in comparison today, it's incredible, but £19,000 in a world that is totally alien to you in such a short time. You have to learn to be flexible, and you've got to really try and, I think I was about 23 at the time, 24, and it was a difficult time to come to terms with this wealth and this adoration, this madness that was going on around us.
And how did John treat it and you? I mean, because reading some of the articles I have done about you and him, I get the impression that, oddly enough, despite the sort of avant-garde image he had, the trendy John Lennon, one step ahead of everybody else in many ways, at home he was actually quite Victorian in some of his attitude, even, dare I say it, chauvinist. Is that true?
Well, he could be all those things. He could be Victorian, chauvinist, boring. He could be all those things. I mean, he was a person that had every facet to his personality, as we all did. But his particular exuberance or wit or criticism, I can't describe how he is or was, that created his image, was his battle against the outside to a certain extent. But at home, living with him day to day, well, when we had the time, he was just, you know, John to me.
When and why did things start going wrong, Cynthia?
I think when they started going wrong was during the time of, and I've said this before, but during the time of the creeping in of drugs. I think the wealth first, the adulation second, and then certain areas of people or certain people that would infiltrate into the group, because that's what happens. Infiltrate, and if you're vulnerable, and we were all vulnerable at that time, then the pressures get too strong, too big, and that, I feel, is when, as far as John and I were concerned, that was when it all started to disintegrate.
Is it one of your regrets then that you couldn't do more to stop him getting involved with drugs and those infiltrators who, according to your account, were responsible anyway for things going wrong?
I suppose my regret there, yes, definitely would be that I wasn't strong enough to get rid of these people and to kick them out, really, simple as that. I mean, I saw them coming in, and I saw them getting involved in our lives, becoming involved in our lives, and creating a disintegration and a lost.
How though? I mean, what did they actually do, Cynthia?
Because they were larger than life people. They were larger, and they were in this sort of circuit of showbiz and pop music, and they slotted in somehow. They were like chameleons that fitted into a situation in life that, if you've never seen them before, you don't appreciate it. But they slotted in and they wheedled their way into our lives and became pals and buddies with the lads who thought everybody was pals and buddies. I mean, they weren't cynical, the boys. I mean, they loved people.
Eventually, of course, John met Yoko Ono and formed a relationship with her. How did you find out about that?
Well, it's hard to say. I found out many ways. I mean, there was the intuition, the instinct, the fact that she was around. Just instinct, pure instinct.
It's been said, of course, that she, by some people, that she in fact was not only was responsible for the breakup of your marriage, as it were, the factor there, but also the breakup of the Beatles as well. Is that a fair comment on the situation?
Well, it's not my comment, it's other people's comments, and I know there's a great deal of interest and curiosity about it, but it happened. It could have been anybody at that particular point, whether it was Yoko Ono, whoever. I mean, for a man you can say Joe Bloggs, but for a woman I don't know what to say. Fanny Adams, it could have been anybody, but at that particular time.
Did that hurt?
Of course it hurt. Of course it hurt.
And when you look back on it, I mean, have you since then ever said to yourself, well, if only I had? I mean, have you any regrets in that respect, that perhaps you could have done a little bit more yourself to save the marriage, to keep it together?
I think if only I had would have been at the time of the drugs, not the time of Yoko Ono. I think that would have been the time, because that possibly led up to that situation. This is only the way I saw it and feel about it.
Sure. We're going to take a break there, Cynthia. In part 2, Cynthia and her son Julian lived on with the Lennon legend, and we'll be finding out how they cope with that and indeed where they go from here. Stay with us. Thank you very much indeed, and welcome back to Regrets, where we're talking to a lady who was once the envy of just about every teenage girl in Britain. She's, of course, Cynthia Lennon. Cynthia, we were talking just before the break about the emergence of Yoko Ono into your life and into John's life. Then, of course, came the separation, which, by all accounts, was fairly acrimonious, wasn't it?
Not really.
Was
no.
it not?
No, if you read the newspapers, you don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. No, it wasn't that acrimonious. It was virtually a non-event as far as John and I were concerned, because we had very little to do with each other. So it wasn't really acrimonious, no.
So where's it left you? I mean, what sort of scars, if they are scars, or what sort of impression has that whole period left on Cynthia Lennon now?
I think from that experience, I've learned to be flexible. I've also learned to be determined. And the fact is that I studied as an art student. I had a dream, like all kids do when they go to college, that one day you might do something with yourself. One day, you know, you'll get there some way. Not total ambition, but, you know, you want to be a success. You want to make a success of your life. And I feel that all that experience has helped me at this point in my life now to do that.
But did you not feel that you'd made a success of your life simply by being married to John Lennon, simply enjoying all the pleasures, all the trappings of the wealth and fame that brought?
Well, if that's what makes life important to you, material world and everything else, well, that's fine, but to me it wasn't important, because when I met John I was a student, we were broke all the time. So that material world, when it came, was fantastic. But I was too young to enjoy it. I didn't particularly dine out on it. I didn't particularly want it. But it was there, and I lived through it, and I enjoyed it. It went. I didn't particularly miss it. Because my happy days were the days when I was with John in a bedsit in Garmoil Road.
Much happier than the days of the mansion in Weymouth? In Weybridge, rather.
Oh, yes.
What about the other person directly involved in this situation, of course, and that's your son, Julian? What effect did Beatlemania, being John Lennon's son, have on him as a kid, early on?
As a child, it created lots of problems. I think he couldn't understand what was going on. I think more so when the divorce came about, when he was totally lost. I mean, he was born into wealth, really. He, you know, when that finished for him, he found it very difficult to come to terms with the fact that all those worldly things and friends of John's and friends of, you know, the house was full of people at that time. When we divorced, it was just Julian and I, which was a great traumatic change for him. And he went through a few problems.
Such as?
Well, he was an upset child for a while. Very upset, and he needed a lot of care and attention. Too young really to explain anything to him. But
was John a good father after the breakup, after the divorce?
He was becoming a good father.
But there was a spell when he wasn't?
There was a spell when he had to sort himself out, because I think he was a bit of a child himself. He couldn't quite understand what was happening to him. His life was incredibly complicated.
But would you go as far as to say that during that period, for those reasons, John, to some extent anyway, neglected Julian?
He pushed him out of his mind, I think, for that time, because he needed that time to come to terms with himself and what had happened to him in his life. But I mean, eventually it came back, and they were the greatest of friends.
So presumably, on that terrible day, which all of us remember when John was killed, Julian, and indeed yourself, suffered a major setback, despite the fact you'd been separated, despite the fact you were remarried by that time. That must have hit you very hard.
Well, I think both of us lost a friend, and somebody that we had lived with. I mean, Julian had lost his father once already, and then he lost him again. So it was devastating for him. It was devastating for me because I always felt that one day we would be able to chat together again, push all the Beatles thing in the background, push everything else in the background, and just sit as two ordinary people and chat about our son. And that didn't come across.
Did it ever cross your mind, Cynthia, that perhaps had you been able to make it work together, his fate would have been a very different one?
Oh, that's something I'd never know about. If it's the good old question, if only I'd done this, if only I'd done that. I mean, what I'm doing now is satisfying to me. What Julian is doing now is satisfying to him. So from all that, those regrets or the tragedies or the experience that we've both had, we're both doing all right, thank you, at the moment, and it's important.
I'd like to pursue that with you in just a tick, but one more question. You, since then, have been married twice. Do you think it possible that one of the reasons why those other marriages didn't work was that perhaps those other fellas found it difficult to follow John Lennon's act?
Yes, they did. They found it difficult to follow John Lennon's act, and they found it very difficult to come to terms with a son of John Lennon, you know, in the fold. And their lifestyles weren't like the lifestyle that John and I had had. So they felt that they had to do something about it, or change it, or make it different. And as far as I was concerned, that wasn't how I wanted it to be. I wanted things to be, you know, gentle and straight.
But they will never quite be that, will they? Because I suspect that to your dying day, regrettable as it may be to you, people will never ever let you forget the fact that you were John Lennon's wife. Now, is that something that bothers you?
Not at all, no, because those days were precious. I have a great son, and we're both